So matters proceeded while Castro was condemned by editors for maintaining an armed camp. Despite the security from attack promised by Washington in 1962, the promise should have sufficed, despite what followed, not to speak of the promises that preceded by then well documented, along with information about how well they could be trusted, e.g. the Lodge moment of July 1960 on the 30th anniversary of the missile crisis. Cuba protested a machine gun attack against a Spanish-Cuban tourist hotel. Responsibility was claimed by a group in Miami. Bombings in Cuba in 1997, which killed an Italian tourist, were traced back to Miami. The perpetrators were Salvadorian criminals operating under the direction of Luis Posada Carriles and financed in Miami. Luis Posada Carriles, one of the most notorious international terrorists. Posada had escaped from a Venezuelan prison where he had been held for the Cubana airliner bombing, and with the aid of George Mas Canosa, a Miami businessman who was the head of the tax-exempt Cuban-American National Foundation. Posada went from Venezuela to El Salvador, where he was put to work at the Ilopango military air base to Ilopango military air base to help organize U.S. terrorist attacks against Nicaragua under Oliver North's direction. Posada had described in detail his terrorist activities and the funding for them from exiles in CANF in Miami, but felt secure that he would not be investigated by the FBI. Posada was a Bay of Pigs veteran, and his subsequent operations in the 1960s were directed by the CIA. When he later joined Venezuelan intelligence with CIA help, he was able to arrange for Orlando Bosch, an associate from his CIA days, who had been convicted in the U.S. for a bomb attack on a Cuba-bound freighter, to join him in Venezuela to organize further attacks against Cuba. An ex-CIA official familiar with the Cubana bombing identifies Posada and Bosch as the only suspects in the bombing, which Bosch defended as a legitimate act of war. Generally considered the mastermind of the airline bombing, Bosch was responsible for 30 other acts of terrorism. According to the FBI, he was granted a presidential pardon in 1989 by the incoming Bush 1 administration after intense lobbying by Jeb Bush and South Florida Cuban-American leaders overruled the Justice Department, which had found the conclusion inescapable that it would be prejudicial to the public interest for the U.S. to provide a safe haven for Bosch because the security of this nation is affected by its ability to urge credibly other nations to refuse aid and to shelter terrorists.